All right, today we're going to be digging into a carburetor on a Honda Fourtrax 250. This is on the 1985 model, and the 1985, 86, 87 are all going to be the same, and I think even more years than that. We've got kind of an unusual style. Generally, you have a slide up and down or a butterfly, and this one you have both, and then along with this pivot point here, that kind of works both systems. And this is a common fail, either one of these, and so that is why these carburetors are hard to come by. So we've got the idle adjust here, obviously a cover here with your throttle cable coming in, and throttle cable running down to this butterfly here. Opens this, and it opens this butterfly, as you can see here, and then it turns this area here, which opens this slide assembly. And we'll pull this so you can see what's inside here. Here's your idle adjust, and all that is doing is raising your slide, opening your butterfly. So when you turn that in counterclockwise, you are going to raise your idle slightly. You want to make sure your four-wheeler is good and warmed up before you do that. You want to also make sure that that your riding conditions are going to be don't adjust it at a low altitude and then go ride in a high altitude. You'll have to adjust it again. To clean a carburetor, it's best to pull it off of the four-wheeler. That way you can get it really inspected and cleaned out really well. To pull the bowl screws here, the 4 Phillips screws on the bottom. A lot of times people really crank on these, makes it very difficult to remove them. If that's the case, you can use vice grip, a little pair of vice grips. A lot of times will help you get those out. Once you get those 4 screws loosened, sometimes that bottom O-ring will stick. I just take a screwdriver or something, just tap on it like that. A lot of times that'll break that seal. So there is the bowl. You want to make sure, going back together, that this O-ring is good. This is your overflow here. Now, you can also take and drain the fuel out of your carburetor by taking this flat screw right here out, and that will drain fuel out of the bottom of your carburetor. You want to make sure that if you do that, you've got a hose hooked up to this bottom nipple here running to the bottom side of your motor. Otherwise, you'll discolor your motor. If your motor's hot, it could potentially start a fire. So you want to make sure that that hose is hooked up there. Now also, the other thing, if your fuel is sloshing around in here, say you're in the back of a pickup on a trailer, hitting jumps or something, you will have fuel sloshing around, and it'll go out this tab here, this top nipple here, and it'll also come out down here. So if you're consistently having fuel dump out here, you probably more than likely you've got a float problem or a needle and seat problem, which I'll show you that here in a moment, allowing more fuel to dump into your bowl than what it can handle. Make sure that's all cleaned out. There's no debris down in there before you go back together. Next thing, like I said, you've got your float here. It's a plastic float. You can damage it fairly easily, and so you want to make sure that that's in good condition before going back together. Here's a spacer here. You want to make sure that goes in the same position. I like just take and set that. That way I remember which way the slot goes. You can also look at this. If this tab is going to be on this side, that's where that slot's going to go, because it's going to ride this. Here is going to ride right in the middle of that. Just kind of keeps the fuel in the right flow in the right way. Pull this pin out. A lot of times these can be a bit of a challenge to come out. You want to make sure, these are aluminum posts here, you want to make sure that you don't put too much pressure on these posts here when you're trying to get that out. They break easily, and they are not replaceable, so you just have to replace your carburetor. Here is what they call the needle, and then this is called the seat here. A lot of times what happens is these needles get grooved around there. A little piece of rubber or sand or something will get stuck in here, causing this to stay open. When this is caused to stay open, you're going to just continue to let fuel drain into your carburetor, and then that is when it'll drain out of this nipple here that I was talking about. Another common problem is when those wear, too much fuel will be dumping in here while you're riding, and that will cause issues as well. So very common to replace these needles. Unfortunately, on this model, the needle and seat are not the seat is not replaceable. You've just got to replace that carburetor. So you hope that a new needle will take care of your problem. Fuel comes in here. This tab here flows through your carburetor and will come out here. So what happens is when you put this in the spot that it's supposed to be, I should do this when we're going back together, but when you set your carburetor up, if you were to have an auxiliary tank with fuel flowing down right now, you would take this bottom bowl here and push up, or this bottom float here and push up on it. It should shut your needle and seat area here. This is rubber, and it'll shut that orifice off right there. And if it's not shutting off when you're using an auxiliary tank, or you could even hold it like this, have somebody else spray carbon choke cleaner down there to see if it's shutting off. That's a good test for that. But you can blow through there here with compressed air, carb cleaner to clean that out. We've got your main jet here, which sits right in the middle, and this slide here with a needle, I can't hold it from the other side, but this slide and needle right here will sit right down in the bottom of this. Your main jet's here, your main jet holder is here. So your main jet on this model is a 128 if I remember right, and that's for the altitude that we're riding in here. But when you pull this main jet, a lot of times the main jet holder will come with it. You want to make sure all these orifices are clean. You want to make sure that when you hold this up to light, you can see through it. You can take compressed air, blow through it. Just make sure it's good and clean. Going back together, take carbon choke cleaner, spray it out. I prefer the GumOut brand. It works really well. It's got a high sprayer to clean it out really good, but you can just spray through it, then I take compressed air and blow through it again. That's the main jet. Again, that's a 128. And then we have your pilot jet here. A lot of times your four-wheeler won't start. A lot of times it's this pilot jet. So take a flat screwdriver, make sure you're seated on there properly before you start to loosen this. That way you don't round off this brass jet. But this is going to be a 38 for our riding condition. It's a lot smaller orifice. You want to make sure that it's cleaned out. Same thing. Take compressed air, blow it out, and take carbon choke cleaner, spray through there. If you can't see through there, then you've got debris down in there, and you need to take some sort of small orifice cleaner and clean that out. But a lot of times, compressed air and carb cleaner will do the trick. We've got your air fuel screw, mixture screw here, and the proper way to adjust that is completely seat it. Check your owner's manual and your service manual to see how many turns out you're supposed to be. So in this case, I'm guessing we're like in the 1.5 to 2 range. So I take it, I'll do half turn, 1.5, 1.5 turns. So again, completely seat it, and then we will go out to the spot that it needs to be. Well, I'll just pull it out all the way to show you what's in here. We've got a spring, and then this needle here. That's what it looks like there. So we've got this spring, and that very fine tip needle there, and that goes together like that. Stick that in there, and then you turn it all the way in again, and then you turn it out the number of your turns that your book calls for. This spring isn't wanting to seat, like it's holding us up. That spring will keep that screw from working itself out as long as you're just in the range of 1 to 2.5 screws out. So we'll go ahead and pull. Well, I'm going to go ahead and set this part of the carburetor back together. We've got your main jet here. Stick it right down in the center one, and you can see that needle poking through there. And that's how you know that's your main jet area there. Make sure these are snug, but you don't need to really crank on them. They have a tendency to work themselves out if they are loose, just because of the way they're sitting in there when you're bouncing around on your four-wheeler. But there's no need to just sit there and crank on that. And this is going to sit like that. I might put this float in there first. And that pin, once you get it out, a lot of times sliding back in is much easier. Push it through, and then take your spacer there, and set this down right on top. Now we can put our Phillips screws in there. Again, you don't have to crank on these, but same thing, they'll kind of work themselves out if you don't have them snug. Now for the top cap here, not a lot of issues will go on under this top cap, but it does get dirty under there. I like to take, when I am cleaning this carburetor, just clean it out. So it's got an O-ring sealing it as well. But it's not spring loaded. A lot of them that'll have a slide similar to what we have here are spring loaded. So I take and I'll actually put my hand on top of it like this to keep that cap from bouncing off of there. Could potentially rip your diaphragm, but on this one there is no diaphragm. But there is an O-ring. So there is the top cap there, and you can see going up and down is that slide there right in the center. You want to make sure that moves freely. Make sure it's the spring here is what pushes it back down in behind this point here. So if you've got an issue, you've either got debris stuck in there or you've got an issue with that spring. So inspect that really good. But to take that apart, a couple different ways of doing that. But you got a screw here to push it out this way. If you've got a small Phillips screw, you can get down in there, pull this top off of this, and then you can pull your needle out and replace your needle. That needle will sometimes come with a carb kit, depending on which carb kit you get. So going back together then, just take and make sure these hose holders are in the right spot, because those will be important when you're going back together on the four-wheeler. And we got one more thing to show you here when we get this top cap back on, and we will be all ready to go. This carburetor turned out really well. And like I told you before, that's where your throttle cable comes down, but on the other side here, we've got where your choke comes down into. We've got a plunger. We've got a cable that will run down here, and we have a plunger, a cap with and then a spring underneath of it, and then a plunger. That'll take a 14mm wrench to remove this plastic cap. You want to make sure going back together that cap is straight before you start screwing it in there, or you will cause some damage to that cap. So you want to make sure the plunger slides in and out of there freely. That plunger goes to that choke that goes up to the handlebars, and if that does not open and shut like it should, you will have a very hard time starting it, especially in cold riding conditions. So that is a carburetor on a 1985 Honda Fourtrax 250.